chapel doors burst open and a voice like steel cuts through the sacred air. "Admiral on deck! 300 bodies rise as one." Hands snap to foreheads. My mother's pearls tremble at her throat. My father's mockery dies on his lips. "Those medals are probably fake," he'd texted minutes ago. "Take off that silly costume," Mom had written. But here in this moment, the truth stands at attention. I smooth the white jacket one more time, not from nerves, but from habit. 4 stars weight each shoulder, 23 years compressed into metal. The medals on my chest click softly when I breathe. Chief Maria Ramirez stands at my right, her jaw set in that way that says she'd fight God himself if he tried to stop us today. James waits ahead in his simple black suit, pressed sharp as a promise he intends to keep. My phone buzzes again. The family group chat. I already know what it says, but I look anyway. The way you look at a wound to measure its depth. 2 messages, black letters neat as printed hymns. Mom writes, "Take off that silly outfit, Rebecca. This isn't some military parade." Then Dad, reliable as rust, "Those medals probably came from a yard sale. $20 for the whole set." The words land and bounce. Not because they don't hurt, they do, but because I've been carrying heavier things for longer distances. I lock the screen and slide the phone into my jacket's inner pocket, where it rests against a small square of blue fabric the enlisted families stitched for me. "You good, Admiral?" Chief Ramirez asks, reading my face like a weather report. "Steady as she goes," I tell her. We walk on your count. The chapel smells of lemon oil and old hymns, salt from the harbour mixing with furniture polish. It's noon, the sun cutting through stained glass to paint the floor in broken rainbows. Behind those heavy oak doors, 300 people wait. Not the family from Ohio who found reasons not to come, but the family I built one deployment at a time. I think about the girl from Ohio who used to stare at the flag outside the library, watching it snap in river wind. Back then, standing out meant standing alone, and Mom's greatest fear was being noticed. "We don't make spectacles of ourselves," she'd say, cutting coupons at the kitchen table while Dad sorted bolts in the garage. But I'd already learned something different from Mrs. Chen next door. Her son David had come back from Vietnam missing half his left hand and all of his words. When his dress blues needed pressing, she'd ask me to help. "Careful with the creases," she'd say. "They hold more than fabric." Senior year of high school, when I told them about the Naval Academy, Mom laughed like I'd announced plans to join the circus. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper. "Who's going to salute you, Rebecca?" he'd asked. "The other girls in your sewing circle?" That was March. By September, I was on a bus to Annapolis with a duffel bag and a flashlight Mr. Peters from the hardware store had pressed into my hand. "It's nothing fancy," he'd said, "but it works in the dark. Plebe summer taught me that exhaustion has a flaw, and you can find it every day." The upperclassmen's voices cracked like whips, designed to find your breaking point and mark it with tape so you'd know exactly where you failed. I shaved minutes off everything: showers, meals, the time between sleep and standing. One morning, an upperclassman named Rodriguez stopped me in the hall. "You move like you're apologizing for taking up space," he said. "Stop it. You earned your square footage. Occupy it." I wrote home careful letters measuring truth by the teaspoon. Training is challenging but manageable. I wrote, not mentioning the girl who quit after someone wrote suggestions on her door in permanent marker, or the night I stood watch in freezing rain until my hands went numb because someone had to and everyone else had already gone twice. Mom sent back recipes for cookies I couldn't make and weather reports from Ohio. Dad included coupons for restaurants that didn't exist in Maryland. Neither asked how I was doing. Not really. By the time I graduated, the uniform had stopped feeling like a costume. It felt like architecture, something that held me up when my own bones weren't enough. Commissioning day came with bright sunshine and my parents in the 10th row. Dad checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. When they pinned on my ensign bars, Mom whispered, "Well, at least you look neat." My first assignment was Okinawa, where the heat sat on you like a wet blanket and refused to move. I learned logistics there, how to move food and fuel and ammunition, and people in patterns that looked like chaos but worked like choreography. The senior chief, a man named Tanaka who'd been in longer than I'd been alive, taught me to read silence. "Listen to what they don't say," he told me. "That's where the problems live." 3 months in, a typhoon hit. We had 12 hours to secure everything that could become a projectile and evacuate everyone who couldn't swim. I worked 20 straight hours, my uniform soaked with rain and sweat. coordinating movements between units that barely spoke the same technical language, let alone the same English. When it was over, Commander Harrison found me asleep standing up, still holding a clipboard. "Good work, Lieutenant," he said. "You held the line." I wanted to call home and tell them, but I knew what Dad would say. Something about government waste or how typhoons were just wind with a fancy name. So I wrote it in my journal instead, pressing hard enough that the words carved through 3 pages. Bahrain came next, sand that found its way into everything, equipment, food, dreams. The port there never slept, ships rotating through like a massive metal heartbeat. I ran maintenance schedules that determined whether pilots lived or died, though they'd never know my name. That's where I met Chief Ramirez for the first time. She corrected my schedule publicly, without apology but also without cruelty. "Ma'am," she said, "you're trying to be nice. Try being clear instead. Clear saves lives. Nice gets people killed." 6 months later came the night on the pier that changed everything. The air tasted like diesel and salt. We were supervising a routine supply transfer when the shooting started. Bullets sparked off shipping containers like furious fireflies. Petty Officer Morrison went down with a sound like a bag of groceries dropping. Training says find cover, assess, respond. Love says move now. I moved. Morrison was bleeding bad from his thigh, the kind of bleeding that means you're measuring time in heartbeats. I wrapped the tourniquet with one hand while keying the radio with the other. Someone was screaming. Someone else was praying. Chief Ramirez appeared at my shoulder like she'd been summoned. 40 yards to the medic station, she said. Then we go 40 yards, I said. Dragging a full-grown man who's just realized he might die is like dragging your own fear made physical. Morrison kept saying his daughter's name, Emily, Emily, Emily like a protection spell. Halfway there, something hot kissed my ribs. I'd find out later it was shrapnel, a piece no bigger than a fingernail that left a scar I can still read like Braille. We made it. Morrison made it. 6 months later, he sent me a photo of Emily's first day of kindergarten. She was wearing a Wonder Woman backpack. After that night, something shifted. The men who used to say "Mom" like it hurt their teeth started saying it like it meant something. Someone started calling me Beacon, not Spotlight, but Lighthouse. The thing you check your position against in the dark. I never told my parents about that night. What would I say? That I'd learned what their daughter's courage looked like when it was the only currency that mattered. They wouldn't have believed it. Or worse, they would have found a way to make it small. The promotions came steady. Lieutenant Commander. Commander. The rooms got bigger, the decisions heavier. I stopped apologizing for my presence and started apologizing when my presence wasn't enough. At the War College, an admiral named Paulson pulled me aside after a briefing. "You lead quiet," he said. "That's good. Quiet leaders make everyone else louder." I wanted to tell him about the house in Ohio, where being quiet meant being good, and being good meant being invisible. Instead, I said, "Thank you, sir," and meant it. Captain came with a transfer to Coronado, where the SEALs train and the ocean never stops watching. I took over safety protocols for training, which sounds boring until you realize it means the difference between hard training and dead trainees. My first week, I watched a kid named Patterson nearly drown because someone thought one safety swimmer was enough for 12 exhausted men in rough surf. I rewrote the protocol that night. 2 swimmers minimum. 3 if the waves showed teeth. The old guard grumbled about coddling until the drowning attempts dropped to 0. Chief Ramirez had followed me to Coronado solid as a shadow. She kept a dry erase marker in her pocket and drew diagrams on any available surface. "People learn better when they can see it," she'd say, turning a window into a lesson plan. One night, she found me in my office at 0200, reviewing incident reports. "Ma'am," she said, "you can't save them all. I can try." That's not leadership. That's anxiety with a rank. She was right. I started delegating, not because I couldn't do it all, but because doing it all meant nobody else learned how. I built a team that could function without me, which is the only kind of team worth building. The suicide happened on a Tuesday that was so perfect it felt like mockery. Instructor Davies, steady as a metronome, the kind of man who folded his uniforms like they were love letters to the Navy. We found him in his car at the Overlook, windows down. Ocean air still moving through. He'd left a note in his personnel file, "Tell Admiral Knox, thank you. She's the only one who saw me struggling." That night, I sat in my office and cried. Not the pretty tears of movies, but the ugly kind that come with sounds you didn't know you could make. Then I wrote a new policy. Monthly check-ins, mandatory but ungraded. A red folder in every office with resources, no questions asked. We started calling them compass checks, just making sure everyone still knew which way was north. The marriage to James happened in the spaces between deployments. He was a civilian contractor, a spreadsheet wizard who could make numbers dance. He'd asked me out after a budget meeting where I'd fought for funding for better mental health resources. "You argue like you're building something," he'd said. "I am. Can I help?" We dated for 2 years. He never asked me to be softer or quieter or less. When I got my first star, he was in the front row crying without shame. When I came home from bad days, the days where we lost someone, where the bureaucracy won, where I had to choose between 2 kinds of wrong, he'd make coffee and sit with me in the quiet until I found words. When I called my parents to tell them about the engagement, Mom's first question was, "Will you wear a proper dress?" "I'll wear my dress whites. Rebecca, please. Just this once, be normal." "This is my normal, Mom." Dad grabbed the phone. "Let me guess, military wedding with all the pomp and circumstance. Going to have them play that song while you walk down the aisle? Fire cannons? It's called tradition, Dad. It's called showing off." I hung up and didn't call back for a month. The wedding planning was simple because James and I agreed on what mattered each other and the people who'd stood with us. No country club, no string quartet, just the base chapel and the people who'd earned the right to witness. 3 days before the wedding, a package arrived from the Enlisted Spouses Association. They'd taken pieces of old uniforms camouflage from deployments, dress blues from ceremonies, and quilted them into a small square that would fit in a pocket. "So you carry us with you," the note said. Chief Ramirez delivered it personally. "They wanted to make sure you knew," she said. "The families remember every time you fought for better housing. Every time you made sure deployments didn't get extended without good reason. Every time you stood between them and stupid policies. I was just doing my job." "No, ma'am. You were doing what was right." There's a difference. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I walked the harbour path, watching the ship's lights reflect on black water. My phone had been buzzing all day with messages from the family chat I couldn't bring myself to leave. Cousins sharing photos from someone else's proper wedding. Mom posting articles about appropriate wedding attire. Dad making jokes about playing dress-up. James found me there at 300. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I keep thinking about them seeing me tomorrow. Really seeing me, and not understanding what they're looking at. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't. But everyone else in that room will. Is that enough? It has to be." The morning of the wedding came bright and clean. The kind of day that makes you believe in possibilities. I did everything with deliberate precision: shower, hair, uniform. Each medal went on straight, each ribbon aligned. The stars on my shoulders caught the light like they were trying to tell me something. In the mirror, I saw myself complete. Not the girl from Ohio who'd watched flags and wondered about the world beyond cornfields. Not the plebe who'd apologized for existing. But Admiral Rebecca Knox, who'd earned every thread of this uniform with blood and sleepless nights and decisions that still visited her dreams. At 11:30, I met Chief Ramirez and the others in the chapel's back room. Lieutenant Patterson was there, Davy's replacement, young and eager and slightly terrified. Master Chief Torres, who'd been with me in Bahrain. Commander Liu, who'd taken over my position at Coronado and improved on everything I'd built, which was exactly what I'd hoped for. "Ready, Admiral?" Chief asked. "Ready." James met me in the narthex, that small room between the outside world and the sacred space. He looked at me in my whites, medals catching the stained glass light, and smiled. "You look like yourself," he said. "That's the point." At 11:58, my phone buzzed one last time. I knew I shouldn't look, but I did. "Mom, take off that silly outfit. This isn't a parade." "Dad, those medals probably bought at a flea market. I read them twice, waiting for the sting." Instead, I felt something else. Clarity, cold and clean as Academy silver. I locked the phone and tucked it away with the quilted square from the enlisted families. One thing that diminished me, one thing that built me up. The weight balanced out. "On your count, Admiral," the usher said. The organist found the first note. The oak doors, heavy as history, began to swing wide. And in that moment, before I could take a single step, before the light could fully find me, that voice rang out, "Admiral on deck." Commander Harrison's voice had the kind of authority that comes from 30 years of practice. It didn't ask the room to stand. It informed them that standing was already happening. And they rose. 300 people moving as one body, hands finding foreheads in salutes sharp enough to cut glass. The sound wasn't loud, it was deep, like something shifting in the earth. Sabers caught the light in a way that made the air seem to sparkle. Medals sang their quiet song of service. I stepped forward into that corridor of respect, Chief Ramirez at my right, and began the longest short walk of my life. In the third row, Lieutenant Chen sat in her dress blues, the ones she'd almost never gotten to wear because someone thought she was too emotional for command. I'd fought that battle in a conference room, using words like weapons until they saw what I saw, not emotion but empathy. She commands a destroyer now. Behind her, Master Chief Thompson stood ramrod straight, the anchor on his collar catching light. During my first command, when I'd tried to lead by volume, he'd pulled me aside. "Ma'am," he'd said, "you don't yell to make steel. You temper it." Every leadership decision I'd made since carried the echo of those words. Halfway down the aisle, movement in my peripheral vision made me turn slightly. There, in the very last pew, pressed against the wall like they were ready to bolt, sat my parents. Mom's hand had frozen on her pearls, her knuckles white. Her mouth opened but found no sound. Dad sat rigid, his phone forgotten on the pew, his face cycling through expressions I'd never seen him wear: confusion, recognition, something that might have been awe. They were seeing their daughter being honored by hundreds of warriors, not playing soldier, not wearing a costume, but standing as the Admiral she'd become despite their doubts, maybe even because of them. I kept walking. At the altar, James waited, tears running down his face without shame. The chaplain, Commander Williams, who'd served with me on the Stockdale, smiled like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole career. "Dearly beloved," he began, and his voice carried the weight of every chapel service held before battle. Every prayer said over the fallen, every blessing given to those who serve. The ceremony itself was simple. We'd written our own vows, short and true. "I promise," I told James, "to protect not just your body but your peace. To stand watch when you're tired. To be your harbor and your horizon. I promise," he told me, "never to ask you to be less than you are. To stand where you stand. To see you fully and love you completely." When he kissed me, the room exhaled as one. Then we turned to walk out, and something happened that we hadn't planned, that wasn't in any script. Two lines formed, enlisted men and women raising sabers in an arch. Not the officers, which was tradition, but the enlisted ranks who'd decided tradition could evolve. Chief Ramirez winked at me as we passed under the steel ceiling they'd made. "We take care of our own, Admiral." Outside, in the bright afternoon sun, people gathered in clusters. No receiving line James and I had agreed that felt too much like inspection. Instead, we moved through the crowd like water, stopping where we were pulled. A young ensign approached nervously. "Admiral, 3 years ago at Coronado I was failing. Swimming was killing me. You found me throwing up behind the equipment shed, convinced I had to quit." She swallowed. "You said that the ocean doesn't care if we're scared, only if we're smart. Then you adjusted my technique yourself in the pool. At 0500 for a week straight." "I remember," I said. "You stopped fighting the water and started working with it. I teach swimming now. To the ones who are afraid." One by one they came, not with congratulations but with stories. The Marine whose wife I'd helped get proper medical care when the system failed her. The petty officer whose son I'd personally recommended for the academy. The chief whose alcoholism I'd addressed not with punishment but with help, and who'd been sober now for 8 years. My parents stood in the corner like furniture nobody knew how to arrange. Finally, Dad approached. He moved like a man walking on ice he didn't trust. "Rebecca," he said and stopped. "Start it again." I didn't. I didn't know. "I tried to tell you." "No, I mean," he gestured at the room, at the uniforms, at the obvious respect that flooded toward me. "I didn't know this was possible. For you. For anyone's daughter." "I'm not anyone's daughter, Dad. I'm your daughter." Something broke in his face then. Not dramatically, but definitely. Like ice giving way to spring. "Those medals," he said quietly. "They're real. Every one of them. And these people. My family. The one I built." Mom joined us, moving carefully like the floor might not hold her. The way they stood when you entered. Like you were. Like I was their Admiral. Because I am. She touched one of the medals on my chest, gently, like it might burn her. "This one's pretty. That's the Bronze Star. For valor. You were in combat?" "I've been in a lot of things, Mom." We stood there, the three of us, in a triangle that had never quite worked before. Around us, the reception continued, not a party, but a gathering, like survivors meeting after a storm to count who made it through. Chief Ramirez appeared with 3 pieces of cake. The grocery store kind with too much frosting. Thought you could use these, she said then to my parents. Your daughter saved my career once. Fought a captain who thought mothers didn't belong in combat zones. She won. Dad took the cake like he'd been handed a classified document. She fought a captain? She fought anyone who was wrong, sir. Rank didn't matter. Right did. After Chief left, we ate the cake in silence. It was too sweet and slightly stale and perfect. We won't understand all of it, Mom said finally. This world. Your world. I know. But we can try. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't absolution. It was a beginning. Later, as the sun set over the Chesapeake, painting the sky in shades of grey and gold that matched my shoulder boards, I stood with James watching the last of the guests leave. My parents had stayed until the end, helping stack chairs even though nobody asked them to. Regrets? James asked. I thought about the girl in Ohio, pressing her nose against the library window to watch the flag snap in river wind. The plebe doing push-ups in the rain because someone had to set the example. The lieutenant wrapping a tourniquet with shaking hands. The captain rewriting safety protocols at 300. The Admiral standing in a chapel while hundreds rose to honor what she'd become. No regrets. A week later, a package arrived at our apartment. Inside was a photo Dad had taken with his phone me walking down the aisle, the light making my medals look like stars. The sabers raised above me like silver wings. He'd had it printed and framed, on the back in his careful handwriting. Our daughter, the Admiral. We are proud. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And sometimes something is enough to start with. 6 months later, I gave a speech at the Pentagon about leadership development. I talked about building bridges between who we're expected to be and who we actually are. About the cost of excellence when the people who should celebrate it don't understand it. About finding family in unexpected places. Afterward, in the hallway, I found Dad standing by a display of military honors, reading each description carefully. I looked them up, he said without preamble. Your medals, all of them. The Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, the ones for campaigns I can't pronounce. He turned to me. You've been at war, and I was making jokes about yard sales. You didn't know. I didn't want to know. That's different. We stood there, two people who shared blood but had lived in different countries of understanding. Finally, he raised his hand to his forehead in an approximation of a salute. It was awkward and unpracticed, and probably wrong in 12 different ways. It was also perfect. Better late than never? He asked. That's what we call a compass check, Dad. Just making sure you still know which way is north. 2 years passed. I got my second star, then my third. Each promotion took me further from the tactical and closer to the strategic, from saving individual sailors to shaping policies that would save thousands. I missed the salt and diesel smell of ships, but I didn't miss making decisions that could end lives. James and I had a daughter. We named her Emily after Morrison's daughter, the one whose name he'd chanted like a prayer while we dragged him to safety. When I called my parents to tell them, Mom cried. Will you bring her to visit? She asked. If you want us to. I want her to know where you came from. Even if it wasn't enough then. Maybe it can be something now. We visited Ohio on a perfect September day. The corn tall and the air thick with that particular smell of almost autumn. Dad had put a flag up on the porch. Not a small one, but regulation size on a proper pole he'd installed himself. I YouTubed how to fold it right, he said, showing me the triangle he made each evening. 13 folds. I looked up why. Mom had framed my academy graduation photo and hung it in the living room, right next to their wedding picture and Dad's high school baseball trophy. She'd also subscribed to Navy Times and left copies on the coffee table. Certain pages marked with sticky notes. This article mentions you, she'd say. About the mental health initiatives. They held Emily like she was made of spun glass and dreams. Dad sang her old songs about sailors, ones I didn't know he knew. Mom made her a tiny quilt from pieces of my old academy t-shirts she'd apparently saved. For when she's older, she said, so she knows. Knows what? That her mother is a lighthouse. That's what that chief of yours called you, right? Not a spotlight that needs attention, but a lighthouse that helps others find their way. That night, after Emily was asleep in the porter crib, I sat on the porch with my parents. The flag moved in the evening breeze, its colours muted in the dying light. I'm sorry, Dad said suddenly, for the jokes. The flea market comment. All of it. I know. I was scared, he continued. You were becoming something I couldn't protect you from. Couldn't fix if it broke. Couldn't even understand enough to give advice. I didn't need protection, Dad. I needed recognition. You needed both. Every kid does. I gave you neither. Mom reached over and took my hand. Hers was softer now, marked with age spots that looked like tiny medals of their own. We thought small was safe, she said. We thought if we kept you close, kept you quiet, kept you from standing out, nothing bad could happen to you. Bad things happened anyway, Mom. They just also happened to have meaning. We sat until the stars came out, the same stars I'd learned to navigate by at the academy, the same ones that had watched over that pier in Bahrain, the same ones that would watch Emily grow into whoever she was meant to be. 5 years later, I retired. 4 stars, 30 years of service, and a ceremony that filled an auditorium. The Chief of Naval Operations spoke. The Secretary of the Navy spoke. But the speech that mattered came from Petty Officer 3rd Class Jennifer Wu, who'd been in basic training when I'd implemented the new mental health protocols. Admiral Knox didn't just change policies, she said. She changed the permission structure. She made it okay to be human in uniform. She made strength include asking for help. She made the Navy a place where people like me could survive and then thrive. My parents sat in the front row. Dad in a Navy cap he'd earned the right to wear just by finally understanding. Mom in a simple dress with an anchor pin on the collar. When I walked off stage for the final time, Dad stood first. His salute was perfect now he'd been practicing with veterans at the VFW. The rest of the room followed his lead. 3,000 people standing for the lighthouse. Later at the reception, I found a quiet corner with Chief Ramirez, who'd retired the year before but came back for this. Remember that first day in Bahrain? She asked. When you tried to reorganize the entire port schedule to be nice. You told me nice gets people killed. You learned. Then you taught. Then you changed things so the next person wouldn't have to learn the hard way. That's all any of us can do. No, she said. That's all you chose to do. There's a difference. James found me there, Emily on his hip, now 5 and fierce and fascinated by anything that moved fast or flew high. She reached for my medals, not grabbing but exploring, her fingers gentle on the bronze star. Pretty, she said. It's more than pretty, baby. It's a story. Tell me? When you're older. I'm old now. Older than now. Promise? I promise. My parents joined us, Dad carrying a box I recognized. I've been saving these, he said, opening it to reveal every newspaper clipping, every photo, every program from every event they'd eventually attended. For Emily? So she knows. Knows what? Emily asked, always listening. Dad knelt down to her level. That your mom is a lighthouse, sweetheart. She helps people find their way home, even when they're lost, especially then. That night, in our empty house with boxes packed for our next chapter, James and I stood on the deck watching the harbour lights. Ships moved in and out, their lights blinking in patterns I'd never forget. What now? He asked. Now I write it down. All of it. The pretty parts and the ugly ones. The mistakes that became lessons. The policies that became protections. The girl from Ohio who became an admiral not despite her parents' doubts but partly because of them. A memoir? A map. For all the girls watching flags and wondering if there's more. For all the parents who don't understand what their children are becoming. For everyone who's been told their medals are fake, their service is a costume, their achievements are showing off. I pulled out my phone and looked at that old message one more time. Take off that silly outfit. This isn't a parade. Then I deleted it. Not because it didn't happen, but because I didn't need to carry it anymore. I had other things to carry now. Better things. Heavier things. Things that mattered. The next morning, I sat at my computer and typed the first line. The spotlight cuts through stained glass and lands on my shoulders the split second the doors swing wide. It was a beginning. All the best stories are. Emily climbed into my lap, still in her pajamas that had little anchors on them, a gift from Chief Ramirez. What are you writing, Mama? A story about a girl who learned to stand up straight even when people wanted her to be small. Did she? Did she what? Stand up straight? I thought about that chapel. Those salutes, that arch of sabres raised by enlisted hands. I thought about my father's awkward first attempt at a salute and his perfect final one. I thought about my mother's anchor pin and her careful collection of clippings. Yes, baby, she did. And when she did, other people stood up too. That's a good story. It's a true story. That's better than good. Emily settled against me, and I kept typing. Outside, the morning sun turned the water to gold, and somewhere a flag was rising. catching wind, snapping proud against a blue sky. The same kind of flag a girl in Ohio once watched, wondering what lay beyond the cornfields and the careful expectations of staying small. Now she knew. Now I knew. The lighthouse doesn't chase the ships. It stands steady, throwing light into darkness, and waits for those who need it to find their way. Sometimes that's your mission. Sometimes it's your marriage. Sometimes it's your parents arriving decades late, but finally home. The last thing I wrote that morning, before Emily pulled me away to make pancakes shaped like stars, was this. For everyone who's been told their light is too bright, their achievements too loud, their uniform a costume stand anyway. Shine anyway. Serve anyway. The world needs lighthouses, not spotlights. And lighthouses never apologize for doing what they were built to do, guide others through the storms. Especially the ones who said we'd never weather them ourselves. I saved the document, titled it Admiral on Deck, and went to make those star-shaped pancakes. Because that's what lighthouses do when they're not saving ships. They make breakfast for the people they love, in kitchens lit by morning sun, in houses that smell like coffee and acceptance, and the particular peace that comes from finally, fully being seen. Mom called while I was flipping the third pancake. I read about your retirement in the paper, she said. They called you a trailblazer. They call everybody that, Mom. No, she said firmly. They don't. I've been reading Navy Times for 5 years now. They don't call everybody that. Okay. Rebecca. Yeah, Mom? I'm sorry we didn't see you sooner. I'm sorry we made you walk so far alone. I wasn't alone, Mom. I found family. I know. And I'm grateful they saw what we couldn't. But I wish we'd been brave enough to see it first. You see it now. Is that enough? I thought about Emily, already designing paper boats that she insisted would be destroyers someday. About the young women at the academy who'd never have to hear that female officers were an experiment. About the policies with my signature that would outlive me by decades. It's enough, Mom. Late is better than never. Your father wants to know if you'll visit for Thanksgiving. All of us, especially Emily. He's building her something in the garage. Won't tell me what, but there's a lot of measuring and muttering about getting the angles right. A boat. A lighthouse, I think. A model lighthouse. He found plans online. He says every admiral needs one. I smiled, flipping another pancake. Tell him we'll be there. Good. Oh, and Rebecca. That thing Chief Ramirez said at your wedding, about you fighting anyone who was wrong, no matter their rank. Yeah? I'm proud that you fought us too. We were wrong, and you stood up anyway. That's real courage. Thanks, Mom. Okay, I'll let you go. Give Emily our love. I will. And Rebecca, that uniform was never silly. It was magnificent. You were magnificent in it. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, spatula in hand, thinking about journeys that don't end where you expect them to. About parents who need 30 years to see their children clearly. About children who become admirals despite or because of where they started. Emily ran in, James chasing her with a towel, both of them laughing. This was my harbour now. This was my home port. Not the house in Ohio where achievement was suspicious. Not the quarters on bases around the world where I'd learned to lead. But this moment this morning, this family that knew exactly who I was and loved me not despite it, but because of it. Mama, are the star pancakes ready? Almost, baby. Good. Stars are important. Why? Because they help people navigate. You taught me that. I did. Yesterday. You said stars are like lighthouses in the sky. James caught my eye over her head and smiled. She's not wrong. No, I said, serving up the pancakes. She's not wrong at all. We ate breakfast as the sun climbed higher, and somewhere, in naval bases around the world, women walked through doors that used to be walls. They did it wearing uniforms that nobody would call costumes, carrying ranks that nobody would call fake, standing in rooms that rose not because they had to, but because respect, real respect, has a way of lifting everyone. And in Ohio, in a garage that smelled of sawdust and determination, a grandfather built a lighthouse for his granddaughter, finally understanding that some lights are meant to be seen from far away. That's not showing off. That's showing up. That's the difference between a spotlight and a lighthouse. Spotlights demand attention. Lighthouses simply stand where they're needed, casting light into darkness, steady and sure and unapologetic. I became a lighthouse. And when I did, I discovered something remarkable. I wasn't the only one. We were everywhere, a constellation of steady lights. helping each other navigate through storms and silence, through mockery and misunderstanding, through all the voices that said our light was too much, too bright, too bold. We stood anyway. We served anyway. We shone anyway. And eventually, even the people who'd wanted us to stay small had to admit that the world looked better with our lights in it. That's not a parade. That's a promise. And promises, the real ones, the ones worth keeping, they look exactly like this: a woman in dress whites, medals earned in combat and compassion, walking through chapel doors while hundreds stand, not because they have to, but because sometimes, just sometimes, respect is the only response that makes sense. Admiral on deck. The words that changed everything. The words that changed nothing. The words that simply finally named what was already true.